Mr. Graham Brown, founder of Pikkal & Co., a brand storytelling consultancy, and his topic would be brand storytelling turn customers into fans. Ladies and gentlemen, can you put our hands together for Mr. Brown?
Hey everybody, how's it going? I know it's late in the day, the coffee's wearing off. So, they gave me, they said 25 minutes, and now they've cut it down to 20 minutes. So, I might have to cut some slides out, but I'm winging it. But that's what I do every day, I'm a storyteller. So hopefully, you can keep you engaged through to the end. This is what it's about. So, really what I want to talk about today is the art of storytelling, whether you're an agency or a brand. And really, why am I qualified to do this? Well, I arrived here, I guess, by accident. I graduated with an AI degree in 1995. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. That's a long time ago. Or maybe you're thinking like, oh yeah, like, he's not that old, surely. Thank you, you're so generous. Well, the reality is that 1995 was a long time ago. It was 25 years ago. It was last century. It was last millennium. So when I walked into my careers development library, as it was called back then, and I said, I've graduated with a degree in AI, help me find a job, the careers advisor, first thing she said was, what the hell is AI? And I should have said, with hindsight, artificial intelligence is an idea ahead of its time. But I didn't. I said something about genetic algorithms or computational psychology or cognitive science. And I saw her eyes glaze over, and by the time I got to the end of the explanation, she pulled out a plastic ring-bound folder from the resources and thumped it down on the table in front of me, and she ran her finger down the list and said, there's the job for you. And I looked at the list and it said, teach English in Japan. So I'm here, guys. I made it to Asia. And I guess I'm still teaching, but not in the four walls of a classroom. Because, you know, I think the best teachers you remember from school were storytellers, right? They were the ones whose lessons you look forward to because they could tell stories that took us on magic carpet rides. It might have been mathematics. Or they were the ones that made us gather around. That's what stories do. And you can use those stories in business as much as you can in a classroom. And that's what I want to share today. And business leaders know this. Steve Jobs was perhaps one of the most, or probably the best, storyteller of our generation. And he said the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation to come. That is what stories do. They create change. Stories can change reality. Great stories can add value to brands. And a great way of seeing this is actually what happens when you don't tell a story about what you do. So maybe we can start there on this journey today with this lady here, Lakpa Sherpa. Now Lakpa Sherpa is a single mom of 3 kids living in Connecticut, USA. Nothing special about that so far. But there's 3 incredible things about Lakpa Sherpa's story that I want to share with you today. The first one is she's climbed Mount Everest. Now, Everest, I know for you guys might be a walk in the park, but Everest is still a phenomenal achievement of endurance, mentally and physically. There's the death zone, there's avalanches, there's freezing to death. And yet, Lakpa Sherpa has guided people to the top of Everest. It's hard enough surviving for yourself, but having to survive for other people as well. This is a photo of her taking Yale University to the top of Everest. Incredible. But that's not the most incredible thing about Lakpa Sherpa's story. There's something more incredible, that Lakpa Sherpa holds the world record for female ascents of Everest. She's climbed Everest not once, but 9 times. But that's not the most incredible thing about Lakpa Sherpa's story, which I want to share with you today. The most incredible thing about Lakpa Sherpa's story is she is a world record holding mountaineer, climbed Everest 9 times, and she works as a dishwasher at Whole Foods. I'll let that sink in a little bit. Washing dishes for a living. How is that possible? By day, she works in Whole Foods washing dishes. By night, she works at 7-Eleven to feed her family, earning just under $30,000 a year. Now, I know what you're thinking. Lots of questions in your head. How? Why? This is not fair, surely. Look at what she's done. And yet, this is about storytelling. The power of telling a story and what happens if you don't. Let's put it in context here. This is Bear Grylls. Now, you've seen Bear Grylls on YouTube, Netflix. He was with Prime Minister Modi. He's man versus wild, bear versus wild, man versus bear. He has all these kind of adventure programs. His net worth is $20 million. And by the way, guys, you can get Bear Grylls to speak at your next event, but it's going to cost you $30,000 for 1 hour. Bear Grylls has climbed Mount Everest once. So, what's going on? And when I teach leaders in my storytelling workshops, one of the first things I like to get across is your achievements don't speak for themselves. You may have climbed Everest 9 times in your own industry, but unless you know how to tell the story, nobody's interested. Now, how can you apply this to brands? Starbucks is the most hashtag brand on Instagram. And they haven't spent a penny on influencers. How is that possible? How do they have such brand engagement, yet no paid influence? The answer lies here. When I get there. There you go. Does this thing actually work? All right, so the answer lies here at Starbucks. Just as I give you the quick recap. Last week, today's episode, we're back. Right, this is Starbucks in Shanghai, which is a work of art. If you go to Shanghai, visit Starbucks. 1,000 seats, room for 1,000 people more. It is beautiful. At the back here on the left of the screen, there's a bronze kettle with 120 plates on it designed by local artists. Now, you may or may not know that Starbucks is from Seattle in the US. And there's an interesting story about Seattle, which is that, and you saw industries and communities falling apart. So you went in search of opportunity, and more people moved to Seattle than any other city in the US at that time. So there was more inbound migration to Seattle than any other American city. And what were they doing? Young people looking for a place to call home. Young people uprooted from their communities. Enter Starbucks. And it's no coincidence that when you talk to Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, he calls Starbucks the third place. The other two places being work and the office. So if you want cheaper coffee, you can go to McDonald's. You can get it half the price, twice the speed. But Starbucks doesn't sell coffee. Starbucks sells community. And the market for loneliness is huge. The total addressable market for loneliness in the world is 7 billion people. So that's the story that Starbucks tells. And Howard Schultz believes. He said, tell your story. Refuse to let others define you. Use authentic experiences to inspire. Stick to your values. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. Who does that successfully? Let's look at how story works and how you can use it within agencies and with clients. So you may or may not know, today is Selfie Tuesday. You know that, right? Today is Selfie Tuesday. Well, it's an interesting fact. There's 1,200 billion photographs taken last year. Almost all of them on these, and many of those selfies. Now, let's put this into context. Taking a photo today is cheap, it's throwaway. Everybody's doing it, everybody's taking selfies. But 50 years ago, selfies, photos, if I can get my clicker working, 50 years ago, can we get this working? You're gonna do it on the end? Old school. 50 years ago, there we go. 50 years ago, we only took photos from momentous occasions. 50 years ago, we landed on the moon. This was an era of black and white TV. This was an era, no internet. Nobody had phones, mobile phones especially, 50 years ago. So, how did we get to the moon? Now, I'll put it into the context again. Did you know there was 100,000 times more computational power in this than there was in the entire Apollo program that got man onto the moon? We haven't been back to the moon for 50 years. The last time we landed on the moon, 1972. We have all the technology in the world. So what I want to put to you today is that we don't need better technology. We need better stories. John F. Kennedy went to Congress in 1961 and he said, we have a mission that we will put a man on the moon by the end of this decade and bring him home safely. And thanks to story, they achieved it. So, I teach storytelling. And I teach it in workshops to leadership. So I teach it to CEOs, I teach storytelling to first-time leaders, I teach it to startup founders. And sometimes I get people come up to me and say, I don't get it. I'll give you one example. Let's call him Tim. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. So Tim came up to me at one of these workshops and he said, Graham, look, I don't want to tell a story. I want to tell the truth. I said, Tim, I understand, but let me put it to you this. If you don't tell me your story, I don't know what your truth is. See, what story does, it's not a fabrication. It's not once upon a time. What story does is package information and helps us understand. And one of the reasons why we don't get it, thank you, assistant, is these guys. So we've grown up thinking that we're kind of logical, rational human beings, right? Now, if you look at sci-fi, we've got people like Spock, who's in Star Trek, and Spock's like this super intelligent alien from some planet Vulcan or something, where everybody's like a super sentient being. And we believe these people are highly logical. They make great decisions. But the reality is actually very different. Spock is the one who's in Star Trek, says to the captain, that's not logical, Captain. And Spock really, like Tim, is the product of this belief that we make decisions on data. We make decisions on logic. And I want to share with you some science, ironically, that's disproven. Antonio Damasio was a neuroscientist, and he studied emotion and decision making. And one of the problems of understanding how emotion affects our decisions on a daily basis is we can only really understand it when you study people who haven't got emotions. And the only people who haven't got emotions, we don't have Spock, are people who've had damage to their brain. And Damasio ran some studies on people, subjects who had disease or trauma to their brain. And he ran a hypothesis which was, what is their daily lives like? Now, his hypothesis was that if you didn't have emotion, you'd probably think that maybe you're a little bit boring, maybe you're a little bit cold, but you'd be really good at chess, make good decisions. But what was interesting that Damasio discovered was the opposite. That when you have damage to the emotional cortex of the brain, the number one thing that you can't do in day-to-day life is make decisions. And he was shocked, because for all our lives we've been telling that people make decisions based on fact and logic. But he found these subjects, they couldn't decide tea or coffee, they couldn't decide whether they get the train or the bus, they couldn't decide what to buy their wives for Christmas. Their lives fell apart. And emotion's not an influence in our decision making. It's the prime motivation. And if you know that and know how to use it, you can use it to create powerful engagement. The problem is, we like to rationalize. We like to not appear emotional, right? We like to think that we are logical, and we make decisions based on fact. So we put this to the test. We took 2 sets of data, and by the way, if you want this data, you can add me on LinkedIn, and I'll give you the data later. On one hand, we've got a survey which asks people, what would increase loyalty to your company? And then, on the other side, the actual reasons why they left. So this part here, what were the reasons people said they would be loyal? Compensation, benefits, money, benefits. That's why people said they would be loyal to the company. And at the bottom, the more emotional stuff. Not many people valued culture and co-workers. That was kind of a benefit, well, not a fluffy thing, like a yoga class or free coffee. But why did they actually leave? This is where it gets interesting. So the number one reason why people left was, to paraphrase the data, my boss is a jerk. What are you nodding for? You agreeing? No? Okay, my boss is a jerk. Number one reason. Number 2 reason, my department are jerks. Number 3 reason, my co-workers are jerks. And right at the bottom, 4 and 5, yeah, money. So what actually happened is here's a problem for us leaders, is that when we ask people why they do things, they always give us logical reasons. Yet the reality is very emotional. And the challenge for us as leaders is knowing which signals to pay attention to. Because people buy on emotion and justify with logic. Just put it out there. You've heard this so many times. Data is the new oil. It's not. Data isn't the new oil, folks. Oil is precious. Oil is limited. We fight wars over oil and the ground we dig it out of. Data is everywhere. There are billions and billions of data sets sitting on your company's servers not being used. People are overwhelmed with data. So data is only as good as the stories we can tell about it. It's not very clear, but I'll read it out to you. If you run a Google search now and put in climate change into Google, you get 1 billion results. 1 billion results on Google for climate change. We know about climate change. They've been telling us about climate change for 120 years. But nobody's doing anything. We've got too much data on climate change. But it's only when people can stand up and tell stories can you create change. So data isn't the new oil. Attention is the new oil. If you don't have people's attention, you can't create change. Pay attention. It's in the language, right? Pay. You have to pay to attend to something. The word attention itself comes from the Latin muscle, to stretch. Tendon is the same. Our attention is stretched. This is the most valuable resource today. And if you tell stories, you can win it. So very quickly, I'm just going to round up with how to tell stories that turn fans or customers into fans. Just a couple of examples. When I teach stories to leadership, I share storylines, which are stories that you can use for your business. This is, you've never seen this at school, right? This is what's called a south up map. Radical. South up as opposed to north up, right? It's real, it exists. Now when I show people this map in the workshop, you know what the first thing they say is? It's upside down. Yeah, it's upside down, Graham. It's not. Think about it. There is no up or down in space, right? Think about it. Ask your teacher, your physics teacher, whoever, somebody who knows. There is no up or down space. The only reason we've had a north-up map for thousands of years is because of people like me. White guys from Europe telling the story of how the world looked, because look at what it looks like now. Bloody hell. Africa, Australia, Asia, India, South America, they're massive. Look at all these piddly little nations down here. Britain, it's just like a little dot. And the reason why, because maps are stories. Maps are not objective. Maps are worldviews. Stories are worldviews. And one of the most powerful storylines is a playbook which I'll share with you, which worked for one of the world's biggest brands. Choose a map and own it. So, just in conclusion, because I'm aware of the time, Dieter Mateschitz, Austrian backpacker, goes to Thailand in the late 80s and 90s, takes a tuk-tuk, loves it, loves the experience. Tuk-tuks working all night, cheap. These guys don't stop. What are these guys doing? What are they on? He discovers that these tuk-tuk drivers are drinking a magical potion. And it allows them to stay focused and stay busy throughout the night. What is this magical potion? They start finding this magical potion showing up in clubs. This stuff's amazing. What's inside it? He goes back to Austria. Nobody's selling this stuff. So he flies back to Thailand, he finds the makers of this magical potion, and he buys the rights to it. And Red Bull was born. Now, when Mateschitz launched Red Bull, he was launching a soda brand. Think about it. You've got to be nuts to sell soda because your two biggest competitors are Pepsi and Coke, two of the biggest brands in the world. How do you compete? Well, Mateschitz owned his own map. He said, we're not going to compete in the soda business. We're going to create our own category, and it's called energy drinks. And the rest, they say, is history. So just winding up, we don't have time for that one. You can email me, add me on LinkedIn if you want. So in concluding, sorry, the last one, the point. So why am I, an AI graduate, telling stories? And this is the reason. You go to any hawker centre here in Singapore, and you see delivery drivers. And the delivery drivers will have Deliveroo, Food Panda, Uber Eats, Grab Eats. They'll have everything on the same bike. Same hawker centres, same drivers, same customers. They've all got access to the same AI technology. And it's when, if you've seen the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, the journalist asking Freddie Mercury about his private life says, Freddie, what's going on? Freddie Mercury said, darling, I'm doing everything with everybody. And that is the situation we have now. The emergence of these new business models where everybody is doing everything with everyone. They've all got access to the same technologies, the same products, the same delivery drivers. So everything we've learned at business school, all those barriers to entry that we learned made our businesses different from everybody else. are being wiped out. The only thing left worth competing for are people and stories. So, thank you very much.